Chag Sameach, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's the most wonderful time of the year. High holidays are over, and we are in the festival of Sukkot. And so what I want to do today, we're going to actually drill down into one particular aspect of Sukkot, but I want to start on a larger sort of level and make sure that we're all understanding the different mitzvot, the different things and actions that we're supposed to be doing. So when we look at the Torah, when we look at our Bible, there are three different mitzvot that are biblical mitzvot, three different commandments that are associated with Sukkot. What are those three?
Coming to the temple to make sacrifices.
So interestingly, the coming to make sacrifices was not specifically for Sukkot. It was for any of the holidays. So I'm speaking now specifically for Sukkot. Leshev basukkah, to dwell in a sukkah, right? To dwell in a sukkah is one of the things during these 7 days. We're supposed to have these temporary structures, these sukkot. We're going to get back to that. We're supposed to dwell in them, and how we define that, again, we'll have that conversation. Mitzvah number 2, the 4 species that we're not doing today because it's Shabbat, right? We take the palm, the willow, the myrtle, and the etrog, which is in English called a citron, right? We bring those 4 species together, and we wave them, and we celebrate Sukkot with them. Good. The third mitzvah? V'samachta bechagecha, you shall be happy, you shall rejoice. This is the happy festival, right? This is the happy festival, and it is actually a biblical commandment to be happy, right? To be joyful. And so you'll see a very different attitude than maybe for those who were here on Yom Kippur. It's a little different feeling, right? It's a little bit different feeling. So those are the 3 mitzvot. Now let's look at the sukkah. So we're going to focus on one of the 3. And what are the 3 things that make a sukkah a kosher sukkah? It has to be temporary. Right? It has to be temporary. It cannot be something that is permanent. As a matter of fact, the codes say that if you have a sukkah that's up all year long, you have to take it down 30 days before Sukkot so you can put it back up again. Right? It has to be a temporary structure. And the codes go so far as to say that if a strong wind comes, it's supposed to be able to blow it over. Okay, good. What else? It has to have schach, right? It has to have this covering on top, this special covering, which that is actually what we're going to get into today. So we'll come back to that in a second. The third? Correct. So it actually technically can have 2.5, but 3 walls is preferable. You're going to see our sukkah that we're going to have out there today has 2.5 walls, because of the way that we needed to open it up for the tot service last night and lunches. So it needs to have at least 2.5 walls, and those walls also need to be temporary. You can't put up sheetrock, right? You know, they need to be something that can be blown over, that can be temporary. Tarps are often used, lattices are often used. Those sorts of things that make sheets even can be used in order to do that. Yes?
There are also minimum heights.
There are minimums and maximum heights that are in there, which I mean, there are actually a lot of different rules and regulations for how to build the sukkah. But when it comes from the Torah, right, those are the 3 things that we know it has to be. So let's talk about, first of all, what does a sukkah represent? Because if we look into our texts, there is a dispute, a very classic dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. What do we think? Anybody knows? What does a sukkah represent? So Rabbi Eliezer argues that the Sukkot represent the actual structures that we built in the desert. Right? That is what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Eliezer says these Sukkot are the same physical structures that we built when we were in the desert. Rabbi Akiva also connects it back to the desert, but he doesn't say the Sukkah represents the physical structures. He says it actually represents the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, the clouds of God's presence that was over us, protecting us, sheltering us in the desert. Right? And there's a dispute between them, and the rabbis of the Talmud then pick that up and go and spin off in their directions. But the very nature, and we're going to get back to understanding it in both of these ways, but the very nature of the sukkah, of what it represents, everybody agrees that it takes us back to the desert. It takes us back to the desert. Why? Why do we want to celebrate this holiday with such a connection, a recollection of being back in the desert? Howard. We spent 40 years there, right? A long time. It's certainly formative, right? Good.
I think a lot of it has to do with your sermon, on history, and why that history becomes part of our present going into our future, and how we're always spanning all of these time zones. It's like science fiction. We're in multiple time zones at once. Back to the future, and that's kind of how I see it.
So connecting actually Howard and Diana together, right? We were there for 40 years. That history is significant to us, and we need to understand that, right? We need to understand that. F? Hey guys, hang on. Shh, guys, we're not going to run around in the back. Okay, you're welcome to come over here and grab some books if you want to read, but we're not going to run around. Thanks.
Could the sukkah represent a kind of respite from, the realities of the outside world? If you're wandering in the desert, you get to put up a sukkah, you get some shade, you get a place to exist, and maybe it's a real reminder to construct that space again and again, all the time.
Excellent. So the sukkah, whether it's a physical structure or whether it's God's structure, right? It represents some sense of protection in a place that was completely wild, right? In a place that had no protection, no sense of security, right? We translate Bamidbar as the desert all the time, and that's because when we think about that part of the world, right, we think about, well, that must have been the desert. That's what they were walking through. But Bamidbar literally means the wilderness. It's wild. It's untamed. It's scary. And so the sukkah represents protection in that time that is scary. Okay, we're getting there, but we're not 100% there yet. Yes?
To me, it relates to Zman Simchatenu, that, this reminds us of where we are today and the gratitude that we should have, that, to go back to this temporary, more fragile, less definite existence reminds us that we've come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. We have something to rejoice at this time, and that sukkah helps us remember of that fragile existence, and yet here we are. Sophia.
The word comes to mind about the impermanence, that it's fleeting, life is fleeting, and this is a time to leave everything that we have in our homes and so forth, go into the Sukkot, and the importance of God in our life.
Yeah, that life is fleeting, life is fragile. And by being out in the sukkah, we recall that. It takes us back. It's this weird, we as Jews are really good at having a symbol mean almost opposite things at the same time, right? At the same time, the sukkah means fragility and security. At the same time, the matzah is a poor person's bread and the bread of freedom, right? We seem to be able to do that really well. And I would say that Sukkot is one of those things, and the sukkah is one of those symbols. So let's dig in a little bit more, so to speak, on the schach. Because I think as we understand the rules of the schach, it's going to be even more illuminating. The schach is this stuff that we're supposed to put on top. So what are the 3 rules? So we see threes, right? 3 sets of 3s. What are the 3 rules that we have for the schach?
It can't completely cover the top. You have to.
It can't completely cover the top. We have to see the stars. We're going to get back to that in a second. But it can't completely cover the top. But there needs to be more shade than sunlight, right? So it can't be a completely solid roof. It has to have some holes in it, but it needs to be more shade than sunlight. That's one. Where do we get schach from? Natural. There's 2 mitzvot that help us with the natural piece. A, it needs to come from the ground, but not be attached to the ground anymore, right? So it needs to actually be a tree, a plant that we've now taken and detached from the ground. You can't just take a beautiful tree that you've got in your backyard and build 4 walls under it and say, I've got my schach, right? It has to be detached from the ground. And the other piece, which is a little bit more intricate, it needs to be made of something that is not susceptible to impurity. Now, we can get into all the details of that, but what that means for me is it has to be in its raw, natural form. Because things that are raw and natural are not susceptible to impurity. It's only once we start messing with them, we start fabricating them, that then they become susceptible to impurity. So it needs to be raw. It needs to come from nature, and it needs to not be completely covered. Now, Diana said something that I read an article from my teacher, Josh Kulp, who is the Rosh Yeshiva in the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem. And in the beginning of his article, he considers himself to be a myth buster, right? It's one of the things he loves to do the most is, we have these myths that are out there, and he likes to come and say, yeah, not so much. So there's definitely this idea that you need to be able to see the stars through the sukkah. Actually, that's incorrect. It is a myth. And we look at Mishnah Sukkah 2:2. It says, one whose sukkah is thick like the roof of a house is valid, even though stars cannot be seen through it. The Mishnah actually says it's valid if it's not. What does need to be able to get through? And it's very important for us today. Rain. Right? It's not that you have to be able to see the stars through it, but it has to be porous enough or permeable enough that rain can get through. That's what makes it temporary, right? Because the buildings that we build, for the most part, we had some issues when this roof was first built. But for the most part, it's supposed to not be permeable to rain, right? It's supposed to keep the rain out. That's one of the main purposes of our permanent buildings, is to keep out the weather, the rain, the wind, the heat. And a sukkah is not supposed to do that. So now, what do we make with all of this, right? What's the lesson then for us today about a sukkah? Why is this still relevant today? Who wants to make an argument? Go ahead, Diana.
I think with all this, it's like, because we're part of the natural world. We have besides the natural part of the sukkah with this we also have this idea of the rain coming in, and these are all are natural phenomena. They're kind of really out of our control.
Mhm.
All we can control, I guess, in a way, how we react to it. But that
So
we are
some sort of a connection with the natural world.
and also not just the natural world, like as in the rain and not only the natural world, but also like this sort of, I guess, supernatural world with the idea of the anane hakavod.
Mhm.
That in our own minds, like we have these anane hakavod guiding us if we let them.
So a connection both with the natural world and the supernatural, right? God. The sukkah connects us to both. Look, I mean, it definitely feels for those who spent last night, this morning in a sukkah, right? I went out this morning, had my cup of coffee, was reading through the stuff that I was going to do in my sukkah instead of sitting on my couch, which is where I normally do that. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really nice. I should do this more often. But I don't, right? I don't. I have a beautiful backyard, and I have a beautiful table that I could go out there every single Shabbos morning, and sit and have my cup of coffee and be out there. But the point is, I don't. And Sukkot then forces us to actually do that. So that's already a good thing, right? So in a connection to nature and connection to the outside world, yes, Sukkot brings that out and it forces us to be able to do that. What else? Josh.
So I think going back to what the rabbis were saying, just like the people were when they were in the Bar Midbar in the desert, part of those 40 years was the Jews had to change who they were, change over the population, the generation, from being slaves to being free. And as looking back now, you're just coming off the high holidays where you learned about Yeshua, returning and changing who you are. Now you're going live in, dwell in a structure that makes you different. Just like traveling through the desert, changing who the Jews are, who are you going to change through history?
I like that. First of all, my apologies, I call you Josh, and your name is Jeff. But, but yes, so what Jeff was saying was that Sukkot follows immediately after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And there is a flow and a rhythm to that that's really important in our tradition of the process that we just went through of teshuvah, of repentance, of renewal. To some degree, and I've actually explained it this way in the past, where I see this as for anybody who remembers college, right? You take your final exams, and then you have that next week off that you just party, right? And that's kind of what Sukkot is to some degree. That's why it's a v'samachta b'chagecha. You should be happy, right? We just had this very intense experience of the high holy days, and now we're through. And now we can celebrate and look forward to a new year. Excellent.
But you're also in a structure that's fragile.
Yes. But you're also living in a structure that's fragile, which makes us then do what? Appreciate what? Time.
It's fun. I mean, this is Moed Day. It's all about time.
Appreciate what we have, right? We live in these beautiful houses. We've created all of this structure for ourselves. And Judaism is not an ascetic religion in that we should eschew all of these things and say, no, enjoy life. Judaism says enjoy life, but be cognizant of the gifts that you have. Be cognizant of what it is that we're enjoying. And for us to say, we're going to leave all of this luxury, go outside, facing the rain, the weather, the bugs, whatever else is out there, the raccoons, right? All of that. And while doing that, v'samachta b'chagecha, it's our most joyful time. That's an incredible and almost revolutionary message. Judaism is coming and saying something. It's like, joy in life is not about things, because we can be joyful without those things. It's about the people that we are with. It's about how we live our lives, the choices that we make, all of those sorts of things. That is what joy in life actually comes from. And the things, okay, if I have beautiful art or less beautiful art, if I have 3 stories or 2 stories, if I have, this car or that car, it's less relevant. And by forcing us, quote unquote, outside, right, the sukkah reminds us of the things that are supposed to make us happy. And it doesn't always, because we get pulled aside, and we get happy with the money, and we get happy with our power, and we get happy with our position in our company. And wait a second, what are the things that are really there? What are the things in the fragile world that's around us? What are the things that are that's truly important? Diana.
Well, I would actually like to just push a little bit on that idea of things that make us happy.
Okay.
With the idea of Yor Mitzvah. And so the idea is to beautify the mitzvah and make it as really as beautiful as you can. And we won't even get into the whole etrog business, because that's another story.
Right.
But there is something kind of amazing when I got my etrog box yesterday, and I was like, ooh, let's see what it's gonna look like. And I was like, oh, I got a good one.
Right.
And I was really happy about that, because I felt like it was Yor Mitzvah. The piton was on, it was perfect. I put it in my nice little etrog box, and this is all part of, I guess, things, if you will. But it's different. It's with kedusha.
Yes and no. So what Diana is saying, let me just explain for those people who are listening. What Diana is saying is there's a concept in Judaism called hidur mitzvah, which is making a mitzvah more beautiful, right? And Sukkot is very much a holiday where hidur mitzvah, this beautifying our mitzvah, is all over. If you go to Israel, you will see people, and in LA in some places, right, you will see these stands of etrogs, and people going and literally finding the perfect etrog, right? It has to look exactly right. And by the way, perfect etrog is a very subjective sort of thing, because what I like and what you like may be different. But the perfect etrog for you, and they take the time to find it. They look at the tips of the palm to make sure that there's perfectly straight and together and not crooked or bent, and because they want to beautify the mitzvah. They want to make their sukkah as beautiful as possible, right? It's not just enough. It's a perfectly kosher sukkah to have the 3 walls and the schach on top. But every sukkah, people put decorations up. Whether it's decorations from the kids, we still have artwork from the kids that have been laminated from when they were in preschool that are still, much to their chagrin, up in our sukkah, right? And we also have, there's a custom that you're supposed to invite what are called ushpizin, guests, special guests into your sukkah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all those people. We actually have pictures of our family going back 3-4 generations that we have up in our sukkah as well as guests, right? So we take the time to beautify it, but the point is we're beautifying something that's going to be torn down in 7 days, right? We're putting all this energy. We're beautifying an etrog that 7 days from now, right, is not going to be useful unless you put cloves in it and turn it into a spice box, which a lot of people do, right? The palm branch is really not going to be useful anymore unless you save it for Pesach, which some people do, and they use it to sweep the chametz at Pesach. Okay, so people have found a way, but the reality is 7 days and it's done. And yet we're spending all of this time because, again, it's not what's essential. It's the act of beautifying that's the essential piece, not the actual physical thing that we have done. It's saying, I'm going to make this Sukkot all the more special. There's some really interesting ways, by the way, to fulfill V'samachta b'chageh. I think I spoke about it last year, and some of them are a little bit more, shall we say, gender biased, because the rabbis, saw things. So the rabbis said, well, how do you make women happy? You buy them new clothes on Sukkot, right? Now, my wife actually likes that idea, right? Sure, I'll go get a new outfit. But these are ways that we focus on the things that make us happy in the moment and not happy permanently, because there is no permanence. And that's what this holiday is about. Yes? We do have the memory of wandering in the desert, and we have the memory then of all these things, right? I mean, some of the best memories that I have are of, Michael when he was 5 years old, trying to carry this huge palm branch that is 5 times longer than he is, dragging it across the yard so that we could put it up on top of the sukkah, building the sukkah together. Absolutely. Those memories stay forever. The sukkah is long gone, but the memory is there. All right. That's what I wanted us to think about as we get started with this holiday, right? Today, tomorrow, throughout the week, into Simchat Torah, into the last part of this, that Sukkot is about the moments. It's about the memories. It's not about the permanence. And so let's find ways to create the joy and recognize the joy in all those ephemeral things that are in our life as well. Because the physical reality of our life changes, and we all know that. It changes every day, it changes every year. And if we depend only on that for our joy, we're going to spend a lot of time without joy in our life. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.